I mean,
Hey, welcome everyone. This is Nick Katko, and I'm here with my friend John Allen, and we're going to have a casual conversation about how Toyota's culture drives cost management. So, John, why don't you introduce yourself briefly?
yeah, well, welcome to everybody. I'm glad we had the opportunity to communicate. Okay, well, when I came out of school, I spent many years in human resources and joined Toyota, moving back from the West Coast back to Kentucky, where I grew up. Um, in 1986, and I was hired about a year before the plant opened, and I worked for Toyota for a little over 6 years, and decided that I was going to go do something different, and I wanted to see if I could succeed in my own business. So I set up a consulting business, and we're still in operation, and it's taken me uh, 60 countries around the world. And most of the consultation that I do is to make sure that we understand what the situation is and then help people put in the management system to allow them to gauge the culture and the development of the culture. Uh, and I have many opportunities to see many places and the way people do things. So I'm anxious to hear your questions because I know your circumstances are probably different than what I've experienced, but maybe not.
So, John, at Toyota, you were involved in getting the Georgetown, Kentucky plant started. And so can you describe how Toyota at a high level sort of went about managing costs?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is that our first theme, we had three themes we had at when we launched the plant, and the first theme was obviously to make sure that we delivered a quality product. And that was because our product would sit on the showroom floor beside one made in Japan, and we couldn't show up as being inferior. So we had to work really hard to get that kind of reliability and predictability into the system. And that was mostly done by the structure, the way the organization was structured, but it was also done by emphasizing greatly accountability. And most people in the plant, those building products, all had standard work. So we worked very hard. We put in a support system that supported the people who build the product, and it was called a team leader. And for every 5 people, there was a team leader. And we gave them a process called Andon, which they were able to pull a cord and somebody would come running. And the first thing they would ask is, what is it in their standard work that they were not able to do? So the culture was built on reliability, quality, and then to ensure that the people who add value had the support necessary to deliver their first rule, which is never deliver anything that wasn't the highest quality to the next product. So the culture was built along those lines, and the second theme we had was one of productivity, and that was an interesting one because we built and thought we were pretty good at building cars, but we were challenged to figure out how we could improve the productivity. That's all an employee-based activity where they go into a room and sit down and look at all their jobs and figure out how they can take waste out of them, and then figure out how the processes fit together. So that was all employee driven. Once we'd been through that, then we began to accept suggestions, continuous improvement kind of suggestions. And that was our third theme. And our third theme was cost. And so that was a process from every employee's perspective. It was a process of improving their job and reducing the cost of doing things. The background of that is that nobody loses their job. Everybody knew that if we eliminated somebody in that process, that there would be a new role for them to take on. However, being in HR, we manage that from the standpoint of the inflows and outflows, meaning the people that leave, which wasn't very many. I think we had 99% retention, and make sure that everybody we grew in the right rate to meet customer demand. Obviously, customer demand was picking up, and so that really wasn't a problem. In that process, we added the second shift and so on. So
Well,
it
John, you,
I,
let me add, you made an interesting connection there, and I want to make sure everybody heard it. You said there was an emphasis on cost, but in the same sentence, you used continuous improvement,
yes.
which a lot of people don't make that connection. I mean, and how did you make that connection there?
Yeah, so everybody knew that the way they protected the customer was through their standard work. So once we got that stabilized and standardized and so forth, then we knew that we would move on to continuous improvement. Well, the great fear that everybody had was that somehow we would start eliminating people, which wasn't the case. And so go way back to the beginning of it. When we brought people into the organization, we said to them, this is how we make decisions. Okay. If we're going to ever have to, if the business is so bad that we have to let people go, here is the process we're going to go through. The first thing is we're going to intensify continuous improvement. Okay. So they made that connection. The second is we would bring in work from outside and do it ourselves. Janitorial service doesn't matter when we get through that period. The intensify cost reduction, intensify the things we know to do to make the cost of the product better. And the last thing that we will do, well, I'm sorry, we will reduce salaried headcount and lay off salaried headcount before we ever lay off people on the line. Okay. So they knew that that process led to job security on their part. Once they had that fear overcome, then we say, okay, now see the connection here because what we're saying to you is that we know that you're the most important people on the plant. We know that we have to maintain stability with you in order to have a good product. And we know that you have the capability, we believe you can learn and grow and make continuous improvement. So these were the kind of things that were said to people, as time went on. And then the last thing was that anytime anybody from who wasn't a person working on the floor, we call them team members, had an issue or a problem, and anybody from a support organization came down, we threatened those people in the support organization. If they came in and solved the problem, they were in big time trouble. So then they saw that connection between, hey, we are important. We are, expected to solve problems, and whoever comes in there is there to help us. And that, as we've talked about before, that carried over into accounting and into the cost department in the accounting sections or in the accounting department. So
So how did accounting and operations work?
how did what?
How did accounting and operations sort of
Okay.
together?
So, yeah. So, if you believe that people can learn and you have a belief that they can do continuous improvement, then the most important thing they can have is information. Okay. But what they lacked in most organizations I've seen is understanding. And so the first thing that the accounting or the cost accounting people was to help the folks on the line understand what the cost situation was. So, in very simple terms, people from the cost accounting department were sent to the shop floor to help people understand the cost and understand the opportunities for improvement, and to understand that the role of the cost people was not to create numbers and decide whether they're successful or failure, but to help them become more successful.
So what kind of numbers did they bring?
Yeah, well, basically, it's the typical kind of thing, quality, cost, delivery, and so forth, that they brought down there. And the real important thing was that it was an adult to adult conversation, right? They came in and said, "We want to help you. Here's how we help you." Here's our cost position. Here are those things that we see that are consistent with the goals that are being set. And here's the things that we need to do to make improvement in them. Now, how can we help you? And some people would say, well, we don't understand. Okay. And they explain. But other people would say, well, okay, so we'd like to know the impact of the decisions that we're making. And they'll say, great. When we get the continuous improvement suggestions and we calculate the benefit or the cost savings from it, we will share that with you and give you an opportunity to understand how you can have an even more powerful suggestion by doing something a little different. So in very simple terms, in communications, it's the difference between information and understanding. And the issue was that the people on the shop floor need to understand, not just have information, and they needed to feel supported. And so, these guys that were and gals that were in cost accounting flocked to the training center, which I was running at the time. Hey, we need training in coaching. We need training in interpersonal relations. We need training in, okay, good, we'll do that. But the real point is that everybody got the feeling that it wasn't finger pointing, it wasn't, finding problems and blaming people. It was really a process, a positive process of trying to get from where they needed to.
So is it sort of safe to say that when accounting worked with operations, that they didn't come with conclusions already?
Well, analysts, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Analysts
Well,
analyze things, right? And they do come to with conclusions, but they were taught that their conclusions were irrelevant. What was really important, what was really important was that they could share their analysis and share what they were seeing and share that information, but it was real clear that the accountability was with the person who was doing the job. And so it's a different kind of relationship that said, first of all, we told everybody in the plant there is no blame. Problems are good. We love problems. That's how we get better. So if you come to the shop floor, right, and you have information that says there's a problem, your job is not to blame people. Your job is to get people enacted and excited about solving the problem. And so I have many instances where people were expecting to be blamed, even though they had made a terrible mistake and found out that everybody that showed up helping them solve that problem so it never happened again. See, that's the connection between the culture and the actual activity because the andon cord was designed to be pulled when you have a problem. Well, the first time you go to somebody and you blame them for pulling that cord, then that's the end of it, right? But we understood that that was no way to get to where we wanted to. So we had 99% participation in the suggestion system. Now, what people need to understand is that a suggestion is not a suggestion until you've tried it out and proved it. Okay, so the whole philosophy was go down, find out what the issues were, help them understand the problem as being seen in other places like cost, and then give them an opportunity to go try. And that was the biggest part of it. We want you to try what you're doing. And if it doesn't work, then we'll look at it and then continue to improve it. But what happened was that people got used to trying things, and as a result of that, you would get solutions that you never really predicted. You know, the obvious things you can predict what's going to happen, but people given the opportunity to actually think will bring you solutions that are quite unique, actually.
so is it safe to say that the way this was structured, that the frontline people understood that if they work on continuous improvement, that will have some impact on cost?
That relationship was made, and it's a tenuous one at first. The first thing they think about is job security. But when they come to understand that they're in control of cost, at least the cost of their job, which enhances their job security, then that connection then causes them to think about not, how can I have problems, but how can I make the company more successful?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
so that
but
connection is key.
yeah. So and the people that are on, if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat and I can get them. I'll read them and, if John can answer them. Do you have any specific examples, John, of um, improvements
Yeah,
that,
well, let's take the one of the first ones and probably the most impactful cost wise. We had a process where a shell body out of body weld would come in and it would go through a coating, and the whole frame was dipped down in this coating. Well, the way that they were using J hooks, and when the car floated off the J hooks, and they had to stop everything. Well, when you stop it and you take the J hooks out of it, you've contaminated the coating, so you got to drain everything. So somebody said, "Hey, we use these kinds of clips on the farm to keep something from that very thing happen." So they used these simple clips, with your fingers and they were able to save untold millions of dollars. It was amazing. But that first one spread through the plant. Can you believe it? And the person who suggested that, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was more than $10,000 they got in savings award.
wow.
So so it when the whole plant heard about that, the whole thing is, hey, this really works. So one interesting fact is that uh, we asked and did an analysis of when the most savings came in. And the answer was November. Why? Because people were saving money for Christmas. I mean, it's funny how those things work, but when you're in an organization, you've got people excited. You'd like to see a smooth flow of them, but people thought about these not as just a way to solve a problem, but a way to also have a better life. So, those kinds of things happen. The other thing that happened that we've talked about before was that we had a supplier come to us and say, "Hey, we didn't charge enough money for this part. We can't make any money on it." And the people in purchasing said, "Okay, you can't stay in business unless you make money. So raise your price to the price where you can make money, and we'll have people in your plant and we'll help you. But the fact of the matter is that we want to enhance your commitment to continuous improvement, and we'll do our part to develop the relationship so that you don't see it's all one way." So the people in purchasing had a very different relationship with their suppliers.
Wow. So let me just uh, there's a question that came from Jerry Solomon. Jerry, I was going to ask this question anyway, but I'll a little later. So Jerry asked about, standard costing or product costing, and how was that or wasn't it used at Toyota? If I don't know if you have any knowledge of that.
I don't.
Okay. So it never got to the floor. If they didn't,
Uh, well, maybe. It's hard to say in a person-to-person relationship, but I would say that if that was helpful to people to understand that difference, because I've worked in Ford and Chrysler and General Motors, and they constantly play games with cost allocation, and they constantly play games with how they use. Now, if I were to guess, and it would be a guess, that it would be, there would be no standard costing. It would be actual costing, and I'm not an accountant, so those
right,
terms may not be. But the fact of the matter is that when somebody went into a supplier plant, as an example, they were looking for capacity and they were looking for opportunity to save money, and so I would guess that it would be actual, just actual costing and not
yeah.
standard costing. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I've read some of your stuff. I know you know all about that.
well, yeah, but I think like you just compared the Ford to Toyota, where Ford was always talking about it, in operations, but at Toyota, there was the absence of discussion,
Yeah.
you know. So,
Yeah.
well,
Well,
while we're on that subject of traditional type financial things, what about budgets and did budgets get down into operations and
yeah.
compare actual to budget?
Now, actually, absolutely. I mean, anybody that had, that spent was responsible for a budget.
Right.
Now, this is probably not a surprise, but the budgets at Toyota were strictly for cost cash flow, strictly. That means that you had no authorization from the budget to spend anything. Toyota had a process they call a ringy show, and a ringy show is basically a problem-solving thought process that you have to go through before you can spend any money. And so, of course, there were targets set and goals set, based on improving cost. But the fact of the matter is that if you had an idea to do something, you still had to go through the process of looking at the problem and what's the problem you want to solve, and then getting authorization. And that went down when I was there initially, that went down to $500. That's much more than that now. But the point was that most people had come from an environment where the budget was an authorization. And they thought that if they had the budget to do it, then they could do it. And of course, you have to go through a process of selling an idea. But Toyota said, no, no, we're only trying to find out where we are. We're going to deal with actual costs and we're going to deal with the actual situation. And we're not going to take some number that you've calculated, God only knows how. We are going to work on a system that says before we spend any money, then we're going to have to go through a PDCA or a problem-solving process to do that.
One of our guests has a Toyota story regarding frontline management that he thinks is very interesting. I'm going
Yeah.
to he's going to tell a story in a couple minutes here. Dan, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Hey, thank you. I appreciate this. And this is right in line with what John was talking about 4 minutes ago too, and interacting with the front line. I worked with Toyota, the production system service center, on a couple of projects, some of the people from there. And I heard this story. So this woman, her name was Lisa Richardson. She worked for Toyota and she was doing a lot of the training around the country and so forth. So I was working with her and she was telling me about when she was first hired. And when she was first hired with Toyota, it was before the plant in the US opened. And it was her and another guy named Mike had just started their jobs with Toyota. They were very excited about it. The plant hadn't opened yet. So Toyota flew them over to Toyota City, in Japan and trained them up and everything. So now Mike, the guy that went over, had just gotten married not too long before, and they had just found out that his wife was pregnant as well. So they were super excited. He's got this brand new job. They send him over to Japan. He's working on the line. He's learning about this. He's very excited about it. So as they're doing their thing, one of them was that they were working on the line to get that experience and that feel and see the andons and all that kind of stuff. So he's working on this one car and he's got like a tool belt on or something like that. And as he's doing his thing, he scratches a car door. Now, as you know, the production line is going. So he's got to make a quick decision, because they make cars every 17 seconds or whatever it might be nowadays. So do I pull it and risk losing my job, for my family and everything, or do I just let it go? He made the right decision. He pulled it, stopped the line. Everybody, all these Japanese directors and so forth came running over to the area. They're all standing around. They're all observing. He showed them what happened and how it happened and so forth. And so as this is like towards the end of the day too. So it hadn't been resolved, but one of the bosses said, okay, well, you can go home now, Mike. And Mike's thinking, am I fired? Do I come back tomorrow? What do I do? So he He tells his wife he can't sleep that night. He's not sleeping well. They're worried about it. He figures they didn't fire me, so I'm going to go into work tomorrow. So he goes back to the line. He continues doing his thing. Nobody has said anything to him. It's early in the morning. He sees a bunch of the directors going into a conference room, which is kind of adjacent to where he's working on the line. And he thinks, oh no, I wonder if this is it. And then as they're going in, you see somebody point to him, and he figures, oh, this is definitely it. And then finally, somebody motions to him to come into the conference room. He walks into the conference room, and guess what's hanging from the ceiling? The car door with the scratch. And his soul left his body, obviously, and he figures, oh, this is the firing squad, right? They came up to him and they said, Michael son, we just wanted to thank you so much for bringing this to our attention. This has been happening for so long, and we could never figure out what the problem was, how it was occurring, and we had to constantly be fixing all these cars. So it wound up saving them a lot of time, a lot of money. And actually, he wound up getting promoted because of that. And he might even still be with Toyota. This goes back decades, of course. But
Cool.
it was a great example, I think, of how supervisors have to engage and provide psychological safety for their employees, so their employees feel that, yeah, I'm going to pull the rope, and stop the line versus letting it go.
Cool. Thanks a
There
lot,
you go.
Bill.
Anyway, thanks for letting me share that.
I have a similar story to that, and I was working on the line, and one of the guys that was part of the project called me.
Hold on, you're breaking up a little bit, John.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
I,
start again.
he, okay, so I was working on the line at Tsumi, and one of the people that was an executive coordinator at Georgetown was standing there watching me, and he called me over and looked at me and said, "It's okay to make a mistake." And I thought, this is Toyota. We don't make mistakes. Okay, well, but when I thought about it, it was an important piece. The other one was I was with the supervisor, and the supervisor went to the quality confirmation and found that there was a defect that made it through one of the processes there. And he turned and went back, and I turned to my interpreter and said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Well, let's go see." Or she said, "Let's go see." So I go over and I stand and I'm watching the line, and the supervisor's over there and he's bowing, in an honorific kind of way. And I said to my translator, "What's going on?" And she said, "The supervisor is apologizing to the operator because they gave him a standard work that allows him to make a mistake." And the supervisor felt like, oh, I'm sure, oh my God, because this person was relatively new. And so, I mean, it's the kind of culture that was hard won for Toyota because they had a period of time when everybody in the company walked out and said, "If you think you can build cars, then please do." And because we don't think this is the kind of culture that were raised in Japan. And so they fired everybody on the board of directors except one of the founders' sons. And that's when they made the realization that, hey, we can't operate like traditional,
Yeah.
like MacArthur had talked to them. So.
Do you have any other examples, like at the Georgetown plant, of specific continuous improvement activities and how how people figured out how it impacted cost? Can you think of any off?
Not off the top of my head, but I know it went on constantly, and
Mhm.
so I'm sure there are hundreds of them. I just wasn't present or not. I didn't know about a lot of them, but
Did
but I but I think the real point here is that it's not that cost drives culture, but culture drives cost at Toyota, and that the specific role of a leader at Toyota was to develop the people underneath them. And the best way to develop somebody is through problems. And so a lot of people miss that. They think, oh, we got to send them to a class or we got to, we got to do something like this. And the fact of the matter is that the most powerful learning and supervisors, group leaders needed to understand how to encourage and develop that. And so we taught them in the training center, the whole process, both the communications and how to develop somebody, and then the other piece of it, which I think was of vital importance, was that we use job instruction training. And job instruction training was a process for teaching somebody how to do their job. So if we had somebody on the shop floor, and I know this happened a couple of times that I was aware of, that person was taken off the job and taken back to job instruction and taught how to do their job in a better way. And so, the thing I'm fond of saying is that funerals are for the living, not for the dead. The issue is that taking them back and teaching them will have an effect, but the effect it has on everybody else that's observing is phenomenal. I mean, it said to everybody exactly where the guy that was speaking said, hey, we value you and we want to train you and trust you. And cost was such an important piece that's usually left out because the cost accountants would say, hey, that's our domain and you couldn't possibly understand it. And that could be true, but the fact of the matter is they were challenged with helping people understand it.
So it's really about understanding what work activities drive cost.
Right.
And if you can eliminate some of those activities, it will have some impact on cost.
Yeah, well, we gave them a very simple analysis technique, which we taught them what waste is, and that they didn't have to, if when they did the analysis of their job and they took every step and they looked at it, they could see very clearly. And the whole Yamazumi activity was to list all the steps in the process on every job in the team and then look at where the waste is. And then, as somebody described, it was like an auction, right? I'll take this, I can do that, and you need to do this, and we can reduce a person, knowing that that person was going to be treated with respect and given another opportunity to do work. So that old Yamazumi activity was based on what we called material and information flow diagrams, and um, and they looked at all those things to make sure that they were eliminating waste. Yeah.
Cool. So let's wrap up here. How would you summarize things for everyone here in terms of the culture and costs?
Yeah, I would say that it's a layering process, right? And even though you think you've given people information initially, they won't believe it until they experience it. So the most important thing that we told people early on was that they were accountable uh, for their job, and the accountability went to standard work, and so they had to perform their standard work exactly the same way every time. And that's just simply because when you have any variation in it, you usually have waste that's around it. So that's the first piece. And we worked on that for 3 years, by the way. I mean, it was no trivial thing. The second thing is that people needed to people in who were building the cars needed to understand how important they were. And so we emphasized their importance by having team leaders that were there to solve any problem they might have. And and it wasn't until we had stabilized and standardized everything that we were saying, okay, now you can look and see, where there's waste in your process. Now you take a step back from that, and what's the role of the group leader? The group leader is to make sure that everybody is trained and understands the process that's going on outside of their standard work so that they have an opportunity to look at the interface between their work and what usually amounts to goals and objectives for the organization and to understand how important their contribution can be. Um, I Mr. Cho, when we were in the productivity phase, was given a plan that said we can get 7% of the cost out of there. And he said, absolutely not. He said, we're going to shoot for 3%. But we can get seven. No, 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 no. This is a learning process, right? We have to understand that when people are learning, there's going to be variability in it. And so we have to understand we'll have more line stops and all that as a result. But that's good because that's a way for us to learn. So let's not put the task so onerous that everybody's going to get discouraged by it and feel like they're beaten up by it. Let's pick something that we can do because the whole process that makes it successful is a learning process. It's not an execution process. The execution is the way you understand your learning. So
Yeah.
and and then the other thing is that all the policies that we wrote in HR had an accountability element to it. And to give you an example about absenteeism, um, people were given when they were first late, 1 minute, 1 second, it didn't matter. The line started whether they were there or not. The team leader would have to assume that role if they didn't show up. When that discussion happened between that person and the group leader, the supervisor, they would have a conversation probably 30, 40 minutes about how important it is for them to be there. Okay. Absenteeism was 1%. Okay. And people got that message. They got it very clearly. But it was not from the standpoint of blaming, because ultimately, if a person persisted in that, they were given 3 days off to go home and write a plan for making the improvement. Okay, so the real issue is that it's easy to blame somebody, and people are used to that, and they have certain defenses, internal defenses against blame. And we said, no, 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 we're going to work on it like it's a problem. So and then the final thing is that when you unleash the continuous improvement process, there's only one rule. You could not have a suggestion about somebody else's job. You only could have a suggestion about your job. And I remember the classic one is we got one. I had responsibility for the suggestion system. We got a suggestion in. We need to build a garage for all these guys that ride motorcycles to work because their motorcycles sit out in the rain. And so we went to that person and said, can you build a shelter? Oh, no, no, no. That's something for maintenance to do. No, it's not about your job. Let maintenance have those kinds of solutions. You keep to your job because there's plenty to do there. You're not going to run out of things to do. And then ultimately, we allowed people to have group suggestions, which means that everybody agreed to their part. But that was only when they got the lesson and understood that continuous improvement is about their job, not about somebody else's job.
All right. You got two questions, then we'll wrap up. One question is, did Toyota tie any kind of performance to pay, like bonuses or anything?
Yeah, no, there was a bonus that people could get, but the most significant one was that when we stabilized the process, the promise that was made to employees was, and there was a union drive going on, and several of them, as you might imagine, is that when they achieved stability, then they were going to go to UAW wages, and that happened. And so, they saw that the company said, we're going to do something, but we're going to tie it to something that's significant. So, and then the last thing is obviously the suggestion system paid for suggestions depending on the impact it had on cost. And there was a cost analysis. The thing that we monitored was that the, the value of the suggestions was around $15 saved. And we emphasized that because the supervisor or the group leader was measured against the level of participation in their area.
Oh,
So if the suggestions got up to $2,000, we knew that there was only a few people that were making those suggestions. So the cost people would also come down to the shop and say, hey, don't think about this as, and sort of world hunger. This is about your job. And I was sitting in a meeting in Tasumi, where they reduced a half a second out of a job, half a second, and they were cheering and it looked like a major celebration for reducing a half a second. And I asked my interpreter, and she said, "No, that's something that's very important to get very, very small suggestions to prove that we're not only looking for the big ones."
Yeah. All right. Two more questions. Number one is um, any insights in how Toyota selected their team leaders, group leaders, and developed them, and even their cost accounts? Do you know anything
Yeah,
about that?
exactly. I had responsibility for the selection system, so I know this very well. And it's not a simple answer, and I'll tell you simply. We went to Japan and defined what success on the job, on every job, based on behaviors. We could take those behaviors and accumulate them into competencies. The selection system was aimed at finding the behaviors that people used in the past and being able to see how that might affect our competencies that we needed. The big point about that is that we had 21, I think it was 21 different behaviors that we had in the selection system. We did a validation study and found that only three were significant for job performance. So, we were even doing that. Um, and the same thing was true with accountants, just like it was anybody else. And we had, if they were a specialist or a supervisor of some sort in accounting or whatever, we had a specific set of behaviors. We did not make a performance appraisal system that emphasized anything other than observations about behaviors, and we changed that. And we changed it, and the significant piece of that is that 50% of their evaluation was based on their behaviors, right? And 50% was based on what they actually performed, accomplishing goals.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, final question. In terms of calculating cost reductions, like through continuous improvement, was this done before events, before any improvements, or, after improvements, or something else?
Yeah, it was definitely after because the first message was go try it and prove it to be a successful concept. Now they had some idea about the impact of it. And in this conversation with cost accounting, obviously they talk about those kinds of things. But what they wanted was the real numbers, not just some calculated number. They wanted a number that was real. And the only way they could get that was to make sure that people tried out their idea and their suggestion. So they at least had some baseline based in reality. So the emphasis obviously was not in the amount of money saved, but in what happened to change the process to improve their process over time. And so, yeah, there was some discussion about it, but the fact of the matter is that it was never actually calculated or looked at until the person tried it. And many times they tried it on the line, but every in the assembly department, every team, oh, I should say, every section had a shop in the back of the assembly department where they could go back and try things. And there were maintenance people that were made available to them if they wanted to make a jig or a fixture or any kind of that. So they got the opportunity to make this and try it. And if it proved to be successful, then the standard work would change.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. So that wraps things up, everyone. Thanks for joining, John. It was good talking to you again. And maybe we'll find another time to do this and we'll talk about something else.
Well, thank you, Nick. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. See you guys. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye now.
Thank you.